I recorded this brilliant conversation with Chuck Bonham, director of California Fish and Wildlife, before the devastating wildfires that have ripped through Los Angeles in recent days. And I just wanted to say that our thoughts and prayers are constantly with the people of Los Angeles and with all those whose lives have been turned upside down by this.
Up in Oregon, 60 miles from that old dam site, adult Chinook salmon were swimming in the Klamath River. It happened in 10 days when our scientists were saying it might take 10 years.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith, and I'm very, very excited and a little bit starstruck to be sitting here with Chuck Bonham, who's the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thanks so much, Chuck, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, Ben, the invitation was well received. I'm thrilled, and I'm super excited for the conversation.
So the reason why I reached out to you, Chuck, was because I've been following for ages what might be one of the most important rewilding moments ever. You know, the restoration of the Klamath River, the toppling of those 4 massive dams, the largest dam removal really in history. You know, a hugely emotional moment, not just for you and your team, but for so many people all over the world, but especially there on the western side of America. Before we get to the Klamath River, I just can't help but ask you about the wolves that are recovering in California. We're also reading in the British press a lot about wolves at the moment, partly because after 30, 40 years of careful protection and conservation and a fragile recovery, a lot of European political parties are now turning their sights towards the hunting of wolves once again. Yeah. And the topic of reintroducing wolves to Britain is a live one. You know, we have an explosive population of deer, which are devastating crops. And it's possible, I think, in the medium to long term that wolves will make a return here in Britain. Meanwhile, over there in California, they just wandered down from the north.
Yep, nature is strong if you give her a chance. And Ben, I actually just last night was reading an article you wrote in March of this year about finding harmony with wolves. So if you hadn't asked, I was going to bring up wolves because it is an experiment in California that's playing out right in front of us. Our Department of Fish and Wildlife, about 100 years ago, knows where the last wolf was shot in California when our predecessors viewed these animals as vermin. And in the United States at that time, back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, most of these animals were viewed as nuisance and programs were implemented to literally take them off the landscape. And you can point to the magical moment under then U.S. President Bill Clinton and our Secretary of the Interior federally at that time, Bruce Babbitt. In our greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which if your listeners have ever thought about is kind of up in the top middle part of America and connects to this vast ecosystem that runs up into Canada. It's a glorious national park. Go visit if you haven't. Wolves were reintroduced. Then decades later, they did what wolves do. The young adults disperse. Idaho, Oregon, Washington State, and about 12 years ago when I started as director of the nation's largest state wildlife agency, we could see the wolves from Oregon headed to California. And here we are now with 77 animals, multiple packs, and the ability for me to experience things that just are unheard of. In the last couple of months, I've been down to one of our Native American tribes, the Tule River Indian Reservation. We asked indigenous tribal elders to name the wolf pack that's now on their reservation. That full circle of life is an expression of rewilding.
It's just such an incredibly exciting story. And from where we sit as enthusiastic spectators on the other side of the Atlantic, we might imagine that California could become a stronghold for wolves, just partly because of the amount of habitat you've got, but also because it's the kind of state where you imagine protections will be upheld.
Yes.
Do you think that's overly optimistic?
I don't. But I will say it comes with important granularity of presence in our rural landscapes. When a large animal like a wolf comes back on the landscape and it's been absent for 100 years, there are a lot of people dynamics that you're working through as well. So it's been really important for our department to be present with our farming and our ranching communities across our Sierra Mountain Range. We're currently implementing the most progressive compensation program in all of America where if a farmer or rancher can quantify a direct loss to their herd from wolf attack, if they can quantify an indirect harm because the presence of the predator can affect herd dynamics, and if they want to apply for funding to do non-lethal deterrence measures across their rangeland, we're supporting that because we've got to find that harmony. But I'm really excited about this because it is one of the most remarkable ecological stories imaginable. We don't exactly know where the population will stabilize, but catch this story for a minute, Ben. We have collars on some of these animals, and we saw a young male get dispersed north of our famous Lake Tahoe area. That young male figured out how to cross a major interstate, wandered into Yosemite National Park, went over to the east side of the Sierras, which is high alpine desert, came back up to Yosemite, wandered down to Fresno, California, decided to keep going, wandered into northern LA County, one of the most highly populous places on the planet, and got hit by a semi-truck when it crossed an interstate highway. The dispersal was natural, the loss of life was tragic, but they're back. And they're present in a place like I think your experience in Mumbai, India recently. We've got these large predators like mountain lions in downtown Los Angeles. So 40 million people figuring out how to live with these animals is also an expression of rewilding.
Yeah, I've invited Beth Pratt, who is the California director for the National Wildlife Federation, to come on the podcast early next year, because she and I were the two speakers in New York City in November at a dinner which sought to raise funds for an organization called Mighty Earth. Yep. That has the goal of restoring cougars or mountain lions to the eastern side of America. Lots of jokes, of course. Ben Goldsmith came to New York to host a dinner for cougars, and we raised nearly $600,000. And what I found so interesting about what Beth had to say that night was just the way people in the west of America are just more comfortable living around these kinds of animals, and they are just more ambitious when it comes to the idea of restoring ecosystems to kind of full functionality. That's a huge difference with, say, the eastern side of America or us here in Great Britain. Cougars in the city of Los Angeles itself, as you said, it's mind-blowing. Yeah,
so like outside Mumbai, India, I think literally it's probably the biggest city in the globe that also has an apex predator within, city boundaries. Hey, if you thought you were starstruck interviewing me, I'm starstruck when I sit and talk with Beth Pratt. She's awesome, a rock star in the conservation movement. And I think Beth and her storytelling is exactly why I was so thrilled to come on this podcast with you. Your ability to tell stories to people about why these things matter for them is like essential for the movement. And what Beth has figured out, and I think is the future in California, is this idea of connectivity. As climate disruption is affecting all kinds of species, as people are suffering through the changes from a warming climate, the idea that we have a freedom to roam, we can move from places, is very true for wolves, very true for mountain lions, particularly true for salmon, which is why the Klamath Dam removal could also be viewed as a connectivity project, connecting people, but also connecting our nature to the places they need to thrive.
Yeah, I've had a couple of guests on the podcast talking about river restoration. We're about to put out an episode with Mike Blackmore from the Wessex Rivers Trust, who's doing some amazing river restoration work in the south of England. And the start of the series, when we first set out to do this, we had Pau Garrigues from Dam Removal Europe. And the dam removal stories are just hugely optimistic every time. And watching the social media feeds of both of those individuals, the sight of these JCB or Caterpillar machinery sitting in the river and just pulling out the dam and the water flooding through. And then there's the Klamath River dam removal, the biggest ever, and not just one, but 4. Chuck, can you just launch into the story of the Klamath River? You're going to do a better job telling us that story than I can, interrupting you with questions.
This one hits me right in the middle of my heart. I've been involved in this effort in different roles for all of my adult life. As I'm getting older, Ben, I might get actually pretty emotional and get choked up here. It may be the most meaningful thing I've ever been involved in, apart from having a child and raising a family. And the story doesn't just start with us, Westerners and, kind of the European civilization dynamic. It starts at the beginning of time. I mean, people have been in this particular place on the North American continent since literally the beginning of time. There are several Native American nations from the top of this river system down to literally where it crashes into the Pacific Ocean. It is one of the mightiest rivers in what is now known as America. It used to be the third most productive salmon-producing river in all of the West Coast, outside of arguably the Columbia Snake River system up in the Pacific Northwest and the Puget Sound in the Seattle area. And the people that have lived there since the beginning of time knew no past, present, or future than a healthy river, no divisions along the river system. There was no upper basin and lower basin. They had a known experience which always had salmon, Pacific lamprey, other fish in that river that were healthy and abundant. Their commerce, their culture, their origin stories were all about this river, and in particular salmon. So one moment in the early 1900s, a private, corporation decided, looks like a good place to put dams. And in 1918, through the early 60s, a series of dams were built, some really large. And for over 100 years, those Native American people in the upper part of the system have lived a life without salmon. And in the downriver system, the health of the river has been declining for decades and a century. And the culture and language in this particular special place adopted these words, upper basin and lower basin. Language expressing a division between people and communities because the dams became a barrier across everything. That's kind of how this begins. It's a special place. It connects two of America's 50 states, California and Oregon. It starts in the high alpine desert on the backside of the Cascade Mountain Range, snow-crested, high altitude. And it's a little bit of an inverted river, meaning most rivers start at high elevation in deep ravines and flow down to the flatlands and out to the ocean. This one's a little bit the opposite. It starts at a high elevation, but in that alpine desert environment, large natural lakes, vast marshes, which historically actually became the first national wildlife refuges designated by then President Teddy Roosevelt. Then the river flows through steep canyons and mountains across the California region and then plummets into the Pacific Ocean on the Yurok Reservation right there at the border with Oregon. It's an amazing, majestic place. If you're ever on the West Coast, you're calling me, and I'm taking you up to see this river. It's phenomenal.
Well, there's nothing I'd like to do more than do a trip up the West Coast with you, Chuck. That would be a huge privilege. And one day I hope I get to see that free-flowing river. In the meantime, I've seen images and I've seen footage since the dams came down, and I've seen jubilant reactions from some of those Native American communities at the reappearance already of salmon in the upper part of the river.
Yeah. So that is something that many of the scientists said would take about 10 years. And let me tell you this story. If you go back to 2000, 2001, there was a lot of political tension in America as the Bush administration came into office. And that Klamath River experienced an unprecedented drought. And for the first time ever, the federal government shut down delivery of water to farming communities. People were in the streets. There was intense strife between Native Americans and other populations. A year and a half later, 2002, the federal government delivered the water to farmers over protest. The next year, we had the largest fish kill recorded in West Coast history. Over 30,000 fish died in this river. The tribe said they had no record of that in their oral history going back to the beginning of time. In 2006, the entire West Coast, 700 miles, commercial fishing industry was shut down because the runs of salmon in the Klamath were so depleted. Right in the middle of this, the owner of those hydroelectric dams, Pacificor, needed to get a new federal license. Parties were litigating in the courtroom, protesting in the streets, and a negotiation emerged. And I've been in this whole discussion in different roles for like a quarter of my life. And in 2010, 40, 50 different parties reached a settlement agreement, including with the owner of the dams, to take them out. It was cheaper. It was a business decision by the private company to take them out. The dams had been licensed originally when we thought smoking was good for our health, and we hadn't put someone on the moon yet. And when they got to the modern era of potentially updating and modernizing the dams, they decided the marginal power, which they could replace with renewable, was not worth the cost compared to the cost of modernizing them to current environmental standards. That deal in 2010 required Congress to act. Congress failed to act. Parties lost hope and gave up. Governor Brown, then Governor Newsom, Governor Kate Brown in Oregon, pulled the parties back to the table. We negotiated a second deal. We created a private company responsible to take the dams out. We went through more hurdles. In 2022, we did a third deal to add more funding to get it done, an additional $45 million. And we started taking dams out at the end of last year, a year ago.
One of the things that Pau Garrigues from Dam Removal Europe told me is exactly what you've just said. With the ever cheaper cost of generating power from solar and wind, and the declining cost curve of power generally, it simply doesn't make economic sense to renew these dams. And a lot of the dams need renewing because they're built with concrete that develops cracks after a certain period of time. I think she said 50 or 80 or 100 years. So that's the issue with dams all over the world, isn't it? That many of them were built more than 100 years ago. They're starting to fall to bits. They need refurbishment, and there's no business case from a power generation perspective for investing that money in refurbishing them. This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com.
Ben, you're right with this friendly amendment. So not all dams are monuments. Not all infrastructure remains used and useful hundreds of years after it was built. So some dams across the United States and elsewhere still serve an essential function that people can't do without. But the reality is, often there are fact situations where the dam is obsolete. The owner doesn't want it. It's a public safety risk. It's too costly to run. It might be no longer used for flood control or irrigation and farming. It may no longer produce power that the owner thinks is beneficial for its customer base. So economic and other decisions are prudently made to fix the landscape. That's modernization. That's green infrastructure mentality. But I don't think this will run across all the dams. The strategic dynamic is, where are those dams where this makes sense? A movement, a coalition of diverse interests, you can get it done and rewild at the same moment.
How integral were the Native American communities, the Yurok people, for example, in this campaign from beginning to end?
Wouldn't have happened without them. The tribes decided at a particular moment there was no other acceptable outcome than freeing their river and bringing their salmon home. It was the right decision based on justice, based on restoration, based on reparation, based on a view of sustainability and health. It was driven not only by salmon, but for their people. These Native American tribes along this river system had been going through a century decline of their people, connected literally to the loss of a healthy river and salmon. And check this crushing irony out. These very same tribes that decided they were not going to stop, they were going to make government conform to this righteous outcome, were flying to Scotland and Edinburgh when Pacific Power was sold to Scottish Power. When Scottish Power sold these utility assets to eventually Berkshire Hathaway Energy, those same tribes began flying to Omaha, Nebraska, and expressing their opinion directly to Mr. Warren Buffett. And along the way, these same tribes didn't even get power from the very dams no one asked their permission to build in 1918. They got power from diesel generators, which create their own problems, on tribal lands. We hosted a celebration October 5th up in the Klamath Basin, and I felt like I needed closure. I didn't realize 500 people would show up and they needed closure too. It was a party in the middle of the day about this. 2 days before, some friends of mine who are scientists with tribes and nonprofit organizations had been running a sonar device just below the last biggest dam, Iron Gate Dam. And they were looking at this sonar device, and you can't totally see the detail, but you can see a big enough image come across the screen. And they're looking at tape, and they're like, holy shit. They're like, we think that's a salmon. So about a couple of weeks after the last pieces of Iron Gate were removed, we thought we saw a Chinook salmon swimming past the old Iron Gate Dam site. So wait for a minute, because the story gets even better. About 4 miles upstream, my department staff started to see adult Chinook salmon in creeks which had been buried under the reservoirs for 100 years. And then, like by the October 16th or 17th of this year, up in Oregon, 60 miles from that old dam site, adult Chinook salmon were swimming in the Klamath River. It happened in 10 days when our scientists were saying it might take 10 years. And now when we run our fish counts here in November and December on adult fish at what we call Jenny Creek, which was buried for 100 years, we've counted 333 adult Chinook salmon. At Shovel Creek, even further upstream, we've counted 246 Chinook salmon. And up in Oregon, by this date, which is like 80 miles upstream from the lowest dam, they've counted 182 Chinook salmon by November 1. Nature, Mother Nature, she is tough, strong. We just got to get out of the way and give her a chance through rewilding.
Absolutely, Chuck. It's just an unbelievable story. During the process, and especially the latter stages of the political process, when a deal was struck with Pacific and so on, were there enemies of the project still fighting? Like who in society locally didn't want those dams to come down to the very end?
Ben, I found in my experience, when you're dealing with rewilding and change, it can feel threatening. So on things like wolves repopulating or beavers coming home or dam removal, I've often been aligned with people who share the same outcome or hope. But I've become really attuned to this understanding I need to have of those that are present may feel the change is too dramatic. And what we see in some of these spaces is, dams have reservoirs often. People have built their homes and they vacation there. They feel attached to the world as they know it. Removal can be threatening. Simultaneously, our rural political dynamic in California can get very frustrated with what they perceive to be government from a capital, Sacramento or Washington, D.C., dictating what has to be done. But in this case, we worked hard at it. And the company we set up to remove the dams, relying on world-class engineering firms like Kiewit Construction, invested in the local dynamic. They put money and funding into the local firefighting systems with new trucks and detection alert cameras. And they put money into improving the local roads and bridges as part of the deconstruction when we left. They put money into new wells and stabilizing the rural water supply for those homeowner associations which were already struggling with those issues. So there is opposition when you engage in something so ambitious. You shouldn't be blind to it. You should be sort of receptive to working through everyone's issues, but keep your eye on the prize. And the reality here was we had several members of Congress who still believed over this 15 to 25-year effort that every dam on the landscape was an absolute must-remain monument. And that is a perspective divorced from reality, from modern time, from trying to work through hard issues. And the most dramatic moment on this, Ben, in 2010, 50 parties, farmers and irrigation districts and tribes and commercial fishing governments came together and signed settlement agreements to do this. And that package of deals would have produced water supply reliability for farmers. And Congress failed to act because some of those congressional members at the time refused to accept the idea that a few dams would be taken out. It hurt those communities. We reassembled the effort. We put Humpty Dumpty back together, and we've taken the dams out, but we still have work to do with the very farming community that has felt threatened that their congressional members walked away from the original deal.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story, and the way that the campaign picked itself back up after defeat in 2010 and managed to get this done is really an inspiration, and one which I hope can be repeated all over the place. A question that comes to mind when I look at those dams come down and I read articles about this story is quite why it costs so much. So you've explained a little bit about how there was investment made in the local community and rebuilding local infrastructure and all of that stuff. But the physical act of removing a mighty dam, to my simple mind, would really require a stick of dynamite. So why is it so expensive, Chuck, to remove these things?
Yeah, these are, it turns out, massive infrastructure projects when you are so ambitious to set yourself on the pursuit of what is now the world's largest river restoration project. I kid you not, we have friends who are convinced this is restoration observable from space. That's the scale of the effort. These are really large dams, 60 to several hundred feet tall. One of them was just earthen dirt. They've been there for about a century. They have accumulated all kinds of gunk behind them. There's local roads and bridges upstream and downstream. There's power infrastructure because their primary purpose has been the generation of power. And when the company, the owner of the dams, was looking at the cost of modernizing, that estimated modernization cost was $450-ish approximately $1 million. So when we negotiated the agreements, we created a cost cap for the effort of $450 million. Ratepayers in Oregon and California, through the utility structures, were increasing their cost a touch to generate $200 million. Then the state of California included $250 million. That $450 became the budget for removal. Along the way, at the very end, the states of Oregon and California added an additional $45 million with a contribution of $15 million from PacifiCorp. Because at the end of this journey, Mr. Buffett and his team, Greg Abel and others, Bill Furman, agreed that the right thing to do was to take the dam out, and they put their own money on the table for the contingency. Ben, I got friends who build roads. I got friends in transportation and housing. They're talking about infrastructure and doing it all the time. I'll tell you, us in the green world, we got the world's largest dam removal done ahead of time and on budget. Hallelujah.
It's just so amazing, Chuck. California is the only place I've seen that has an officially sanctioned and funded effort to restore beavers to all of its watersheds. I saw the announcement by Governor Newsom, I think 2 years ago. How did that come about, and how's it going?
It's going really well. It came about because of Governor Newsom's leadership and a good friend of mine, Wade Crowfoot, who's the Secretary of our Natural Resources. You know this. You know it better than me. They're nature's Swiss Army knife. Like, they are engineers. For years, Ben, we've been paying small community groups to put trees in our rivers to create habitat for salmon. And at the same time, we've been yanking beavers out of watersheds for 50 to 100 years in California. In some places, my department in the 50s was actually putting them in little wooden crates with parachutes and dropping them out of planes down in the Sierras because we wanted them there to chew trees, put trees in stream, make habitat for fish. So this just made no sense. And we started to think about it. We're like, what if we had beavers back? And people like Beth Pratt and others, I've done 2 things in the last year which have made me cry. Among the many joyous events, I went with my scientists and we put beavers back on Maidu tribal summit lands in the Sierras. And then we took beavers down to the Tule River Indian Reservation and put them back there. And the Tule River people, they have beavers in their pictographs, in their caves on their ancestral lands. And we shot them out 100 years ago. That is a full circle of life. I mean, we've got things going on in America that you're tracking. They just had a BeaverCon summit in like Boulder, Colorado, because people are waking up to the fact that nature can produce the very same benefits we as humans have been trying to engineer forever. They can do it smarter, faster, cheaper, and it's just the right thing to do.
So are beavers now protected in California? Is it easy for a homeowner or a farmer or a rancher to get rid of beavers in California? And also the second part of that question is how is the recovery going, in the sense that are we going to reach a point where California is saturated and all the available habitat niches are occupied by beavers, or are we a long way from that point?
We're a long way from this kind of idea of occupation of full habitat. And we're on our own journey. I mean, our laws and codes said 100 years ago, certain animals weren't worth it and they should be run off the landscape. Wolves, lions, bears, beavers. This is a journey for our own department. We no longer view those animals under the law as nuisance, vermin. What we are trying to do on beavers is those places down in our lowlands and our rivers and creeks where beavers can be a challenge for water agencies because they'll burrow into infrastructure. We're trying to train and educate people. We're not going to let you shoot it, but if you call us, we'll help you relocate it. And then like a donor program for humans, we're trying to match that beaver in the place where it's less welcomed with a different part of the place that's willing to welcome it for reintroduction. And that kind of matching is going really, really well because it's removing kind of the beaver from the place where it's provoking conflict, skipping over killing it, frankly, and bringing it home to a place where it can help us produce these nature-based solutions.
Chuck, I've enjoyed this conversation so much. It's rare that I get to meet someone who's had such a profound impact on the things that I care about most in the world. And I really hope that the knowledge from the taking down of these Klamath River dams can be disseminated around the world. One of the things I worry about most is that whilst we in the West, in North America and Europe, are starting to understand the madness of big dams, and that removing them provides a cascade of benefits to society. The companies that built them are now busy in the developing world building new dams where billions of people depend upon aquatic biomass for their protein. Dams going up on the Mekong and in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And we've got to persuade the world that dams are not the right way to go in most circumstances. And the taking down of the Klamath River dams, I think, has gone a long way to getting that message out there. Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm hugely grateful to you.
Ben, big fan. Call me anytime. I can't wait to see everything else you cover in your podcast. Thanks for leading the movement. You're giving hope to people around the world.
I feel so honoured to have had this time chatting to Chuck Bonham, a guy who's devoted his entire career to overseeing and shepherding some of the most monumental nature recovery events happening anywhere in the world. California is America's third biggest state, and some truly groundbreaking things are happening there, from the recovery of wolves and beavers and other wildlife to the toppling of century-old massive dams and the liberation of rivers like the Klamath. Chuck is really at the heart of it all. This is what this podcast series is all about, and I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, I'll be so grateful if you spread the word among your friends and people you think might like these podcasts. Give us a like or a review on whatever platform you use. It makes a big difference, and we want to get these stories out as widely as possible. My other great love alongside rewilding and nature is test match cricket. And so I'm pretty starstruck, really, to tell you that I've got on the podcast next time Kevin Peterson, one of the finest batsmen ever to play for England or any team. Since retiring from international cricket, Kevin is devoting himself to saving Africa's last remaining iconic rhinos. As you know, rhinos are under huge pressure being poached for their horns, which are used in Asian medicine. And Kevin is doing all sorts of brilliant things to highlight their plight and to bring funding to those who are trying to save them. Do join us for the next episode of Rewilding the World.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species, bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.